again, I'm Tyler Johnson. I'm from the University of Oklahoma, and I will be chairing this panel on U.S. politics on television and on the page. We are going to, in efforts to sort of, I don't know if we'll get back on schedule, but to get us closer to being back on schedule, we're going to allow the presenters to present, and then we're going to hold questions until the end. And I'm going to be that annoying chair who sits right in your sight line and holds a number up to tell you how close you are to your 12-minute point. So you'll see a 3, a 1, and time. Whether you listen to me or not is up to you, but I will judge you forever. So we will start with Alyson Farzad-Phillips, Nora Murphy, Claudia Serrano Rico, Kyle Stephan, Gareth Williams, Morgan Hess, and Prashanth Bhat. Apologies to the final 6 of you, who in the future will be known as et al. In Farzad-Phillips et al. And their paper, a report on presidential advertising in the 2016 general election, a referendum on character.
All right, well, thank you for joining us. So this project came out of a course that we were all in together, a graduate class on political communication. And you can see the full report online at the University of Maryland's CARP webpage. It's been published, but we're going to talk through some of those highlights for you today. And so the big conceptual idea behind this project is that in many ways, campaign ads function as a second voice for the campaign itself. And so we wanted to know, what is this voice saying then? And so we took some time to look at the ads to help figure that out. Now, these numbers are from when our report was published in October, but it just gives you a basic sense that Clinton's campaign and the super PACs that were supporting Clinton were spending huge amounts of money on ads compared to Trump and some of those super PACs, though certainly we know Trump benefited from a lot of free airtime as well. So there's a couple sort of details we wanted to set you up with, and that we were focusing on the Clinton campaign, the Trump campaign, and 2 super PACs. We looked at a number of ads, the number that was released as of the time of our report, and so you can see in and of itself, Clinton also had way more ads coming out on a regular basis. So there were a couple things we were coding for. We were deciding, was the ad a character-focused ad or an issue-focused ad? Did it have a positive tone, a negative tone, or were they comparing between 2 candidates? What was the basic subject matter? And coding for emotions as well. And to give you a sense of the type of tree structure we use, this is from Shaver et al. In 2001, gave this basic coding structure for emotions, and that's what we used as well. And so you'll see as we work through these, each of the charts graphing the data that we saw here. So we're going to start with the format.
Well, maybe you can remember this ad. It was considered by media as a powerful attack, a very ingenious spot, but this ad, as most of them, highlights the negative message of Trump, and also shows to Clinton as the right choice to be president.
Right. So we're actually going to watch the ad itself. Here's just a small clip of the 1 minute ad.
I can see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. Oh, I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember.
Our children and grandchildren will look back at this time, at the choices we are about to make, the goals we will strive for, the principles we will live by, and we need to make sure that they can be proud of us.
All right, so So we chose this ad primarily because it was representative of what Clinton's ads in general looked like in the 2016 election. Sorry, just getting it back to what it was. And I really want to interpret to you the strategy that Hillary Clinton for America used during the 2016 election. So keeping this commercial in mind, we coded all of the ads from this campaign from Hillary Clinton for America. As you can see, as far as positive or negative ads go, 21 out of the 38 ads were negative. Negative in terms of highlighting the negative aspects of Donald Trump. Additionally, as Nora told us, we coded for emotion based on 7 terms of emotion and also security. If you can see here, the number 1 emotion was joy, and joy was directed towards Hillary Clinton. The second and third most coded emotion were anger and fear. Obviously, anger and fear were 2 huge emotions that Hillary Clinton used that she directed towards Trump, kind of as a character assassination towards him. Additionally, we wanted to see, were these ads attacking character or were they attacking issues, policy issues, economic issues, and whatnot? And we understood that it wasn't just one or the other. So we coded it for character issue and then also issue character. So if it was leaning one way or another. We noticed that 16 of Hillary Clinton for America ads were directly based on a character attack or based on character itself, whereas only 4 were primarily solely issue. As you can see, it's definitely skewed more towards character. Our character issue category, there were 12 out of the 38 ads that were some sort of combination of character and issue, but primarily character. And then the last thing we coded for was the subject matter of these ads. So character attack, which was a subject matter itself in this 2016 campaign, as I'm sure you can recall, was 25 out of 38 ads. The number 2 and 3 subject matters that we were covering were women and children and national security. So when you're looking at Hillary Clinton for America's ads in totality, these were the 3 major subject areas we saw. As you can see, character attack is number 1. So in conclusion, Hillary Clinton's campaign in review shows us that it was a character-focused ad campaign. They were negatively charged, focusing specifically on character attacks of Donald Trump. Some of these ads were comparative in that the anger and fear was directed towards Trump, and that was compared to Hillary Clinton, where the feelings of joy were directed towards her. So this is what her campaign on television and on the internet looks like in review.
Okay. Now we're going to look at the Trump campaign. And we'll look at this next ad by Donald Trump.
It's a movement, not a campaign. Its leader, Donald Trump, builder, businessman, success, doing what others called impossible. Donald Trump's priority, you.
All right. So, all right, even given that positive ad, the majority of what we found in our coding analysis was we had some of those more positive movement type ads, Donald Trump's movement in his campaign, but we did find that there were 7 positive ads throughout his campaign in our analysis, but then the rest of the ads were either negative or comparative, and then the rest of the ads were coded as the majority anger-filled or fearful throughout the campaign. And then, if you'll go to the next few slides, the rest of them were either coded as... Sorry. There you go. Then the rest of the ads were primarily, again, character-based, either character issue or issue character. Again, that's if it was primarily comparing the character of a campaign versus the issue campaign. You can see that broken down again. Donald Trump also had a lot of campaign bios, again, emphasizing himself throughout his campaign. And then we're going to break down again, like, implications of that.
Yeah, we both worked on this. We looked at Donald Trump's advertisements. It was both difficult and easy to do it in terms of coding, because it was easy because there were not many ads for us to look at. It was difficult because there was no particular strategy per se. His campaign seems to have built on as we went forward. But there were a lot of negative ads in the beginning from August in September, but the ads became very positive after October, especially after the tapes were released and there was some controversy. Seems to be like he was working on some image makeover or image repair, and there were a lot of positive ads after October. 40% of his ads were focused on character-based, and most of them were positive in the beginning and after October, and negative in the beginning from August and September.
So the next thing that we looked at was the Priorities USA Action Super PAC, which supported Hillary Clinton. We chose the super PACs that we did because they were the two on each side that spent the most money on advertising by a long shot. So they were the most representative sample to choose. And this is just a quick clip of part of an ad from them.
I know more about ISIS than the general people. Nuclear is just the power of the demonstration is very important. I want to be unpredictable.
Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So Priorities USA was overwhelmingly negative and overwhelmingly powerfully negative, as you just saw in that ad. They pulled on anger, fear, and sadness a lot, and almost on no happy emotions at all. And this is pretty standard for the way that the role that super PACs serve in political campaigns, and I think it's really important with the subject that we've been talking about today, because super PACs don't require the candidate to, at the end of the ad, say, "My name is Hillary Clinton and I approve this message." They can take on a much more negative character assassination role without damaging the credibility of the person, of the candidate who they're trying to support. You see that they focus primarily on character and character issue campaigns. There were no issue character campaign advertisements at all, and one really out of place issue campaign on voting that got run like twice and then was never run again. They mirror the Clinton strategy pretty well, where they're also talking about women and children and national security, but they hit those messages a lot harder, and a lot of the Priorities USA Action ads asked you to empathize with grieving mothers or mothers whose children had been bullied or hurt or killed as a result of the same type of hate that they accused Donald Trump of. So it was the same sort of themes, but hit much harder, which again is common with the role that super PACs play.
I'll wrap this up quickly. Finally, there was the Rebuilding America Now PAC from supporting Trump's campaign. Rebuilding America Now. They were third in spending after the Trump campaign itself. 76% of its spending was geared at attacking Clinton. They produced 13 ads between June and October of last year. 11 attacked Clinton directly. 9 attacked Clinton's character. None of their ads were comparative, which was interesting as well. The Clinton super PAC. Only 5 of their 13 ads aired more than 100 times by October 11th. 4 of the 13 ads were only released on time. This reflected a strategy that the super PAC itself released in an online slide deck of the Rebuilding America Now digital success to date. They asserted in that 75% of the ad's impact was on the production quality. The 2 subsequent ads that they released after that were anomalous in that those were the 2 positive ads. They were issue-based. They did not address Clinton at all. They did not address Trump at all by name until the final banner of Trump-Pence. Those were America Soaring, which addressed industry, and Education, which addressed U.S. education. Featured much higher production values, and they were the only 2 that had a unified identity that could be seen at, readily identified as sourced from the same groups. According to that slide deck, they found that there's a 10.7% overall
favorable opinion increase following America soaring, and 27.3% increase in positive opinion among 55 to 64-year-olds. It was at that time also that the Trump campaign switched to a more positive message, so one wonders if this was an influence on that. You want to make any conclusions here?
We'll wrap up here because I think we're about to get our time. So just a couple key takeaways that we saw in these trends is that they were more character-based than issue-based. Both the numbers and watching the ads through the coding themselves indicates that. And that both Clinton and Trump relied on fears and anger as key appeals in their ad. And so our conclusion really comes down to this notion that these ads are sending a message that neither candidate is fit to lead, that the character attacks will likely continue to resonate, and that really these character issues could inhibit the ability of, at the time it was President-elect, though certainly now it is President Trump himself. I think I might have been in denial when I was editing that slide last night. So to govern a divided electorate. So as this second voice, the campaign adds this as a second voice. It's a negative against the character second voice, and that's where we'll leave you. Thank you so much.
That was the most academic relay race I've ever seen. Thanks, guys. Our second presentation, Thomas McCloskey from the University of Maryland. I hate them both. Negative campaigns in the liminal space between character and authenticity in American political discourse.
Okay. So I was pretty convinced that Secretary Clinton was going to be president. And all of the experts and all of the polls pretty much agreed with me that that's what was going to happen. And I felt that way right up until about 9:15 Eastern time when Florida and Ohio and Pennsylvania all started to break against what everyone's perceptions of the election predicted. And since that moment, I've sort of been wrestling with how that happened. And I realized that as a rhetorician, I am sort of positioned to look at this in a way that might be different or unique. And so I think issues of character and authenticity might really inform our understandings of this campaign and how we continue to move forward about political rhetoric. So the argument I'm making here is that the end of the campaign represented what I'm calling a sort of post-character moment that Trump was better able to navigate by abandoning character altogether and embracing a rhetoric of authenticity. So let's talk about this, what I'm calling a sort of post-character moment. Both candidates, as the previous presenters mentioned, were extraordinarily negative and really sort of vigorous in their efforts to assassinate the character of their opponent. Trump assassinated Secretary Clinton's character with several rhetorical strategies. The first was this sort of crooked Hillary meme that was fired off on Twitter and in any number of political advertisements. And this relied on the sort of long-held assumptions about Secretary Clinton, that she was one of the most well-known candidates to ever receive a party's nomination. This is the consequence of being in the public eye for almost 20 years. Another rhetorical strategy Mr. Trump used was the sort of two-poke fallacy of that means you also. So whatever Mr. Trump's biggest weaknesses were, he would accuse Secretary Clinton of those same issues. So when people brought up his complete lack of foreign policy experience, he would bring up her Iraq War vote. People would mention that he has no government experience at all, he would say Secretary Clinton is the least qualified candidate to ever get a party's nomination. If she wasn't a woman, she would have got like 2% of the vote. And when people accused him of lengthy and extensive Wall Street ties, he would say, well, Secretary Clinton gave speeches to Goldman Sachs, so he continued to sort of impugn her character. This is a rhetorical strategy, by the way, that he is still using today when there's sort of overwhelming evidence of sort of a Russian collusion or influence in the election. He just 2 days ago accused Nancy Pelosi of those sort of same ties, calling for an investigation into her relationship with the Russian Federation. A third strategy that he used was the sort of lock her up meme of Hillary Clinton belongs in prison. It often wasn't specified what crime she had committed, and that was by design. It allowed his supporters to sort of fill in whatever they were most angry about Secretary Clinton about to sort of undermine her character. And the fourth rhetorical strategy, I wrote in my notes, gross Breitbart nonsense, such as showing up to the third debate with women who had accused President Clinton of sexual violence, sexual assault. And so this combined to sort of really impugn Secretary Clinton's character. Conversely, Secretary Clinton also attempted to assassinate then candidate Trump's character, and she didn't have to try very hard. It was pretty easy to undermine his character. A little too easy. It wasn't that difficult. And her strategy here was just to kind of let him talk, to sort of convey his own words to voters. So I think the previous presentation did a very good job in outlining some of what these ads looked like. There was the incidents of him admitting to sexually assaulting a dozen women who had never met each other and all had very similar accounts of their encounters with Mr. Trump, mocking a disabled reporter, feuding with beauty queens on Twitter, and making several pretty overtly racist attacks against Mexican Americans and, for that matter, a federal judge who he said was unqualified to weigh in on his Trump University lawsuit because of his Mexican heritage. So the outcome of these sort of attacks, these rhetorical efforts to undermine and assassinate the character of their opponents, really were kind of successful. Voters had record numbers of high disapproval of both candidates. There were the number of voters who were against all candidates were also record numbers. So and combined with the record number of dollars spent on political ads, these messages were sort of widely circulated. So this leads us to this sort of post-character moment. If the character of both candidates is undermined, well, what do you do? How do you navigate it? And to answer that question, I turn to this sort of notion of liminality outlined by Victor Turner. And he argues that a liminal space is sort of a middle period between illness and a return to health again. So you're really sick and you're on your path to sort of improving, but you're not all the way there yet. You haven't entirely returned to sort of a space of health. And Turner argues that this is really, really temporary, that it's not designed to be a long-term space. Scholars from Cal State Long Beach, Karen Rasmussen and Mark Rich, have challenged this traditional assumption of liminal spaces, arguing that it can often be much more permanent, much more lengthy. So they turn to people with disabilities, with chronic illnesses, people with HIV and AIDS, and they specifically write about PTSD in veterans, who there is no necessary final finish line or recovery towards health. It can actually be much more permanent. So let's look at how these candidates navigated this moment through the lens of liminality. Secretary Clinton, if you view her approach and her strategies in the campaign through the lens of liminality, it becomes clear that she believed that this notion of this post-character moment would be temporary, the very much original Turner conception of liminality. We believe this, and she had reason to believe this was true, because voters in previous elections had always sort of got serious towards the end of the campaign. It took a financial crisis in 2008, it took a hurricane destroying the Jersey Shore in 2012, but eventually voters decided that they were going to get serious about who they wanted to be president. And so you can view Secretary Clinton's actions from that lens, that at some point voters would return to normal and recognize that a candidate having no character whatsoever is kind of problematic. This could, if you view her decision to sort of not campaign in Wisconsin and not as much in Pennsylvania and in Michigan, and instead focusing on turning states like Arizona and Texas blue, that makes more sense, right? She just assumed that the normal was still the norm, and that Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan would all still vote for her. Obviously, that was a miscalculation. So conversely, Mr. Trump behaved like he believed character was no longer a major determining factor in American presidential elections. So, of course, we have had negative campaigns before. Of course, we have had political efforts to impugn the character of political opponents. But as far as I know, we haven't had a candidate who actively didn't care about his own character, that it wasn't a priority for him. Instead, Trump embraced this a rhetoric of sort of authenticity, believing for voters that even authentically awful beats disingenuous, that it is better to be authentically and real, like a garbage human, but voters believe that that is really you, than it is to be disingenuous. And so voters echoed this in exit polls, saying, he talks like me, I appreciate that rhetoric. yes, he's making racist statements. Yes, he's making sexist comments. But I also do those things, and so I appreciate that authenticity. And so that combined with this sort of anti-establishment rhetoric of being opposed to the media and opposed to Washington, when Trump would attack the media, it lended itself to those same sorts of attacks. They just took him seriously. And so this leads to a few implications. The first is that maybe we're in an era of post-character rhetoric in American politics, where character just doesn't matter, and instead we just want voters who are super, super authentic. An implication from that, though, is that Mr. Trump's recent speech to Congress seemed to similarly rely on the trappings of character and the institutions of character, while still using fairly authentic and language. So I wonder, we can look at what will happen in the future. And the second implication is that Secretary Clinton, frankly, kind of should have known better, because she has never been more popular in her entire political career than two moments. One, when she had that fairly remarkable comeback in Ohio in the 2008 election, and second, when she conceded the 2008 nomination to then Senator Barack Obama, saying that was when she gave her the highest glass ceiling, has 1,000 cracks in it. Voters related to her more when she was more authentic, when it was perceived as genuine and real and sincere. And the third implication here is that for the Democrats seeking to challenge Mr. Trump's presidency, one potential lever to pull on next is the value of authenticity. And I believe there are several political candidates who might be able to do this well. Jason Kander, who was the Attorney General from Missouri, who campaigned for a Senate seat and lost by about 2 points, but Mr. Trump won Missouri by about 20. He was the one who put together a political ad of him assembling an M16 while blindfolded, and he talks like a human being and is fairly authentic and fairly relatable to people. So when Democrats look for the next generation of people looking for authenticity as a sole determinant, might be a compelling strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Maureen Minielli of the City University of New York, who will be talking about a behind-the-scenes examination of character assassination in the Nixon White House. Plenty of fodder there.
Oh, I think you're going to enjoy what I found. I'm Minielli from CUNY, and unfortunately the title of my presentation suffered its own character assassination in the conference program, so my opening title slide is here to rectify that, repair its image, as well as mine, by changing something that is clearly bland in the conference program to something a little bit more sexier that I found in a Nixon document, a memo from the president to Haldeman in May, I believe, 1972. And I think it summarizes the research that I did for this presentation. The quotation says, "Whatever we do and however it comes out, we are going to be torn to pieces by our liberal critics in the press and on television." And then it goes on, a behind-the-scenes examination of character assassination in the Nixon White House. So this is what the actual quotation looks like in the document. This is the memo from Nixon to Haldeman, May 15th, 1972. And this is actually in reaction to two things that were going on in May. Earlier in May, the United States had bombed Haiphong Harbor, and they had mined Haiphong Harbor, and they had bombed supply lines. And Nixon is being reamed by the New York Times for these particular actions. In particular, the New York Times was claiming that these military actions was going to jeopardize the Moscow summit that was supposed to occur later on in May, and was basically, let me go right here, this is Nixon's response, his perception of what the New York Times was saying about him during May. It's basically how the media, with almost hysterical predictions, claimed the Nixon administration had blown the Russian summit and our whole generation of peace foreign policy. And I want to open up with this because this ties to a document that I'm going to discuss a little bit later in my presentation that I think epitomizes what is going on in the Nixon White House and also demonstrates the complexity of character assassination when you are looking at a president and you're looking at his particular view. So what I did was I analyzed about 200 documents that I've researched from the Nixon Presidential Library in Yorba Linda, California, as well as the online Nora catalog, which has a lot of documents that are released for public viewing. And one of the things that I noticed in my research was that you see a spike in character attacks, particularly the years 1970 and 1972, and I'm going to put a little asterisk for that, and explain that asterisk in a second. Particularly Nixon's trip to China in February 1972, and then the Moscow Summit in May 1972. And then you also see an uptick in character assassinations around elections, particularly his own personal re-election attempts in 1972, as well as the 1970 off-year elections. So the asterisk is, I need to tell you that I stopped my research right around 1972 when Watergate was starting to occur. Because in my opinion, and anybody who knows me knows that I study Nixon, he's my guy. And when you start moving from the 72 election to Watergate, it's a whole new ballgame. And you're having a whole different series of attacks. And I figured that was going to just make my presentation way too long. And so I stopped it right around mid-1972. So what I discovered was basically 4 different categories related to character assassination. And it's interesting to think that we're not only looking at attacks on the president, but we're also looking at attacks on the institution of the presidency. And with Nixon, in comparison to our current president, you see some class with the president. He still thinks that the institution holds some meaning. It should be prestigious. It should have, it should be of an elevated nature. And that comes back into play later on when we look at the attacks itself. And so we're looking, what I found out, what I was looking at was that I'm not only looking at attacks on him, the institution, but I'm also looking at counterattacks that the White House had put out, particularly by the White House, but also by others. And then I discovered a very unique system of what I would call media rewards and punishments for either giving positive news about the president or giving negative news. So we're going to first take a look at the attacks. And Nixon thinks he's the most attacked president out of all the presidents. And you have to understand that these attacks are coming from all different areas. So it's not just the press, it's Congress people, it's the public. And in Nixon's mind, it's also internally from different facets of the federal government. So in 1970, he becomes preoccupied with his image, and this is most likely, probably he's getting ready for his re-election attempts in 1972. And he started working on his re-election attempts as soon as he took office in 1969. So I'm pretty sure that this is part of his re-election attempts. So what he wants done is he wants people to write columns about his positive image. He actually asked his aides to commission a poll about his image, and that was conducted. And then he also wants to engage others to promote a positive image, not only of himself, but also of the institution. And then one thing if you know Nixon, you'll know that he was a little paranoid and a little crazy. And he suffered from low self-esteem in the sense that he was always constantly comparing himself to previous presidents, particularly Eisenhower and Kennedy. Kennedy was the one he compared himself to most. So we're looking at counterattacks, and these are basically the strategies that I gleaned from all of these different documents. He wanted the White House to create a hell-raising squad to attack the Democrats. And you'll see me later on say that because Nixon has a level of decorum, that he doesn't necessarily call out individuals by name. He will go after generic groups, like Congress or the Democrats. He wanted to hire a holler guy who would go through White House and Congress and talk to people about all the positive things that the Nixon administration was doing. He talked about creating a plan to divide a hostile press. He wanted columns written, particularly about the dignity of the office. And interestingly enough, he wanted to use more television appearances, not just of himself, but of his staff at the national level, the regional, and local levels. And what they found was that regional television really worked well in terms of portraying a good positive image of the president. And then he also looked at the possibility of the White House creating their own television service so they could control the news and put forth positive comments, stories, as opposed to being continually attacked. So interestingly enough, you're looking at a document, you're not going to see it, but I'm going to comment on it. This is a document that pretty much demonstrates the craziness of Nixon. And in November 1970, he decides that the flavor of the month that he's going to attack is his own CIA. And he has claimed that its muscle-bound bureaucracy has paralyzed its brain. So he asks his aides to find out if he could reduce the CIA numbers by 50%. And he particularly wants to eliminate anybody from the Ivy Leagues or the Georgetown set. And you know he's not very happy with the elite liberals. And he tells folks in the CIA, you are not allowed to hire anybody from the Ivy Leagues. You cannot hire from any campuses who have disfavored my efforts to reduce the Vietnam War, particularly presidents of campuses that have spoken out or any faculty. So instead, what he suggests is that the CIA hires from the Midwest, the South, and possibly the West, except for Cal Berkeley and Stanford. All right? I also noticed that he engages in a lot of manipulation, and that's one of the things that my research with Nixon, you got to remember he's a lawyer. A lot of our presidents are lawyers. They are very shrewd with language usage. And Nixon is an anomaly in the sense that he has respect for the institutions, except for Congress. He continually rails at Congress because he proposed all of the work he wanted done in his first term in 1969, and Congress dragged their heels, so he's constantly calling them out. But he had utmost respect for the Supreme Court, not saying that he didn't argue with the Supreme Court or try to manipulate the Supreme Court behind the lines, because he did, but he also had respect for the institution of the presidency. So, the manipulative strategies that he wanted to employ. He wanted to increase messages to the public to confuse them. And if you've done academic debate, you'll know this is called the spread, which is where you put out a lot of messages where all of a sudden people are not sure about what's being said and they get slightly confused. And then if someone was to call him out on something, he could say, oh no, we said this over here. Interestingly enough, he wanted trips, foreign trips scheduled strategically. In particular, in 1972, Secretary of State Rogers wanted to travel to Europe in April 1972. And Nixon said, no, all of our good, positive domestic news is coming out in 1972 in April. You're going to detract from that positive news. So instead, what we want you to do is we want you to go in May 1972, which will be a good precursor to me showing up in Moscow for the summit. So he also engaged in calculated leaks, which if you know about Watergate, you know it was pretty much about plugging the leaks. But in this instance, what he wanted to do was he wanted to give favorable Congress people or favorable people in the press a heads up about particular things that were coming out so that they would report it. And that was one of the rewards that they got, but also trying to control the image of him and the institution. There were two instances that I saw where he wanted to set up another entity and then knowing that they would not respond and then get somebody else to call them out on not responding. And so one was Congress, the other one was Muskie when he was a candidate in 1972. Muskie referred to Nixon as Tricky Dick. Nixon went off the rails on this one. He wanted an investigation. He really wanted to attack back. And then interestingly enough, he had a lot of wealthy friends, so he wanted to know if his friends would be willing to buy media outlets like newspaper chains and television stations so they could report favorable news. So this document right here troubles me. I haven't done a lot of research on this, but I do want to share it with you, and then maybe you can tell me if my perceptions of this is correct or not. So this refers back to the opening statement about being obliterated by the liberal press, particularly the New York Times. And this document is really talking to Al Haig about military incursions in Vietnam while he's at the Moscow summit. So I'm going to show to you two paragraphs from this particular document. And this is from May 1972. The first one says, With regard to Vietnam, it is vitally important that there be no abatement whatever in our air and naval strikes while we are gone. It is particularly important that any stories in the press indicating that we are letting up during this period be knocked down instantly, preferably in Saigon, if necessary at the Pentagon, and if necessary even more by you in the White House. So this is going to go to the next thing where I'm talking about how does he go and attack? He uses surrogates. So this is what he's doing. There's nothing that can hurt us more in the minds of the public opinion than some suggestion that we made a deal with the Russians to cool it in Vietnam while trying to negotiate agreements with them in Moscow. This ties to the second paragraph, which really kind of bothers me a little bit. At least 200 of these sorties, and these are the military incursions, should be on targets in the Hanoi-Haiphong area. With the Saratoga on station, that number we might well go up to 250 or 300. In fact, it would be well to increase it just slightly in that period so that there could be no implication at all to the effect that we are letting up because of our trip to Moscow. So how I'm interpreting this is Nixon is willing to risk American soldier lives and actually increase the amount of soldiers going into fight in Vietnam because he is concerned about the press's response to what's going on. He doesn't want anything taken away from the Moscow summit. And if you know anything about American political history, you know that Lyndon B. Johnson pretty much was not able to run for a second presidential term because he's the one who committed combat troops when American boys went across and we started losing soldiers. The pressure to bring our boys back home was so immense that he could not, he was not able to run for re-election. So what I'm seeing here is a person not thinking about American lives, but thinking solely of image by the press. So he's got class. He doesn't want the president to respond to all of these attacks. So who does the responding? Nixon does not, and he points this out, he does not berate the press. He does not berate publishers. He does not berate editors. He does not go after Democratic senators. So he has surrogates, and he has many surrogates who go about doing the attacking for him. For example, the cabinet, various members of the White House staff, supportive congressional members. There were about 20 in the House of Representatives, including Pierre DuPont and John Hines out of Pittsburgh. And then interestingly enough, CRP is the Committee to Re-elect the President, also affectionately known as CREEP. CREEP actually created a counterattack group, and their sole mission was to disseminate attacks that were written by various members of the Nixon White House, primarily his speechwriters. And if you appreciate presidential language, I would urge you to look at Pat Buchanan's blistering attacks at the Washington Post that he has written. They're just beautiful creations. The power of the word is just amazing. So they use these letters to attack. He also used different surrogates. For example, labor leaders like George Meany used the Reverend Billy Graham, who was a popular televangelist in the 70s. They used the First Family, and then surprisingly enough, they pimped out the dog, King Timahoe, his Irish setter. They wanted him, and actually believe he made a cameo at the dog show here in Washington, D.C., to portray some sort of positive image about the president. On to reward and punishments, and then I'll be finished. So, interestingly enough, Nixon is very creative in terms of how he wants to reward members of the press and punish members of the press. One of the things that he talked about was that during his presidency, whenever he'd go to California, the Western White House, the press would tag along, and the press would bring their family members, and it would become a vacation. And they always let him know well ahead of time, this is when the president's leaving. He's like, well, forget this, all right? If they're going to attack me, then we're not going to be nice anymore. So instead of announcing his travels early, he had announced the travels at the last minute, and he would actually make that, the press, the travel, he said, we're going to make it a working vacation for them. They're not going to be able to spend any time with their families. He rewarded favorable press members by inviting them to activities like White House dinners, and then he asked that the members of the White House talk twice as much to favorable members of the press than those who were against. In particular, during 1972, the Washington Post suffered the wrath of Nixon and the administration, particularly its publisher, Katharine Graham. Katharine Graham was actually worried that Nixon, if he got elected, will pull her licenses for her TV stations and have them go dark, force her to sell them. And he actually looked into that because he was so angry with the reporting of the Washington Post. But this document, I think, clearly demonstrates how angry he was with the newspaper. You're looking at a partial list of the press who have been nominated to attend the 1972 China trip with him. And you'll notice right here that there's a line crossed out, and then you'll see some writing right here. So, ironically enough, Stan Kurnow from the Washington Post has his name crossed out from being one of the reporters being able to go with him to China. And in Nixon's own handwriting, I'm not sure if you can see it, but he says right here, under no circumstances is this reporter allowed to attend. And the official White House response to denying the Washington Post from attending, he said, only one paper per city of 1 million or under is allowed to attend. The Star, the Washington Star will do it, as opposed to the Washington Post. And when I read this, I just couldn't help but add this image. I could just see Nixon going, yes, I got the Washington Post. So in conclusion, you see a president who is preoccupied with the media and himself. You have your various garden variety attacks based on different issues. You see specific character attacks depending on what part of the year you're talking about. And he was very creative in terms of his responses by using surrogates and rewards and punishments. Thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Leticia Bode of Georgetown University with her talk, Remediated Political Comedy, Presidential Candidates and Character Assassination.
Thank you very much. Warning, I am not going to be that fun. I really got to study Nixon more. I am really excited to be here this weekend. I do all sorts of things that I am learning are very related to character assassination, but I had really not used that concept before this weekend. So I study mostly social media and politics, new media and politics, mediated politics, writ large, political communication, all of those sorts of things. And obviously there are character assassination implications for everything that I study, but that's a new concept for me. I will also preface this presentation by saying I think this is the newest project that I've ever presented on, which is very exciting. I just got the data last week, but be kind. So you heard some about political comedy yesterday, so I don't have to spend too much time on that. Obviously, it's increased over time, and we're seeing kind of a new version of political comedy that's coming out now. So classically, you saw like the occasional political comedy happening on late night television, apart from things like Saturday Night Live. Increasingly, you are seeing political comedy dominating the late night scene, particularly for some types of the new comedy shows that I will talk about in a little bit. The other thing that we didn't hear a lot about yesterday is the effects of political comedy. So this is generally seen as a positive, especially in terms of knowledge and efficacy. So people that are tuning into political comedy tend to know more about politics than people that don't, and they learn from those particular shows. So if you do this observationally, you see those knowledge gains. You also see them if you do them experimentally. And this also has implications for political participation, obviously. So the kind of motivation that got me started thinking about this particular project that I'm starting to work on is Andrew Chadwick's hybrid media system. Are people somewhat familiar with this book? Or okay, a little bit. So this is one of the books in the Oxford University Politics Digital Politics, Oxford University Press Digital Politics series, which actually Andrew Chadwick also edits. Coincidentally, it's good to edit your own series. And I had read this book years ago. I assigned it for a class on new media and politics this semester, and upon rereading it, just found a lot of new gems. I think this must be how religious people feel about reading the Bible over and over again. So it got me thinking about how what he calls remediation. So there are all sorts of lovely things in this book talking about how the media system is changing and how that blurs the lines, especially not only for people in their everyday lives, but especially for us as academics to be able to measure the exposure that people have to different types of media. Because, you can watch a video on the internet, you can, read CNN, like what does all of this mean, right? So it's just changing the way that people interact with media across the board. One of the things that he talks about specifically is this idea of remediation. So whereas before, you tend to get media from the media source. Now you may get it from the media source, or you may get it from some other source. The most obvious of this being social media, right? So if my friend chooses to share a CNN article, that is being remediated to me. It's being curated twice, right? The media is serving as the first gatekeeper, but then there's this other gatekeeper that happens as well. And that is going to change my experience with that piece of media. So that's something that I've been trying to think about, is how does that change that user experience and kind of broader trends that we see related to media as a result. So one of the things that I study is political comedy. If I watch Last Week Tonight with John Oliver on my television, as it is kind of originally intended, right, I'm going to have one particular experience with that. It's HBO, so I don't have commercials, so that's a little bit different already. But I'm, where am I sitting? How am I, I'm probably going to watch it all in one go. It's not broken up into clips, all of these sorts of things. It's going to be a little bit different if I watch it on YouTube, which is then going to be broken into smaller segments as opposed to watching it in one entire chunk. And that's going to be even more different if I see it as so many people now do in my Facebook feed between, a picture of a cat and a political rant, right? So all of those sorts of things are going to change that experience that I have with the media, maybe what I learned from it, or how much I learned from it, maybe how I feel about it, or how I perceive it. So these are just some of the things, again, very new project, so I'm spitballing here. These are some of the things that I think could be different when content is remediated, particularly when political comedy is remediated. So one thing that it could change is the actual content that's produced in the first place. And there's some kind of anecdotal evidence that this is something that the producers of these shows are thinking about, is how do we get, so for John Oliver, he does Sunday night shows. There's like the Monday morning Facebook is supposed to be like, they want it to be filled with John Oliver. So how do we get people to share these clips of things that they saw last night so that it spreads beyond our original audience? So what kinds of content are being produced with this idea that it will be shared, or in the hope that it will be shared? The content that is viewed could also be different, right? Because some chunks of content might be viewed more than others. And who is viewing that content is also likely to change. So I don't have HBO. It's just, if that's the only way that I get to watch John Oliver, I don't watch John Oliver. But because it's shared on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all of these other places, I actually watch John Oliver quite a lot. So that is going to change the types of people that are tuning in. And then the general user experience. Again, go back to this. You can't actually see it here, so that was useless. But as I'm sure people familiar with the YouTube platform are aware, underneath videos there are buttons encouraging you to do things, right? Favorite it, share it, like it, comment it, all of these kinds of things, right? So that might change the way that I think about the content and what I do with it. So today I'm going to focus a little bit on this, like what actually gets viewed. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But I want to take a little side note here because we're at a character assassination conference and I haven't even mentioned those words yet. So this is a really big question to me. I wrote the abstract for this conference thinking, of course, it's character assassination, but the more I started reading about character assassination, thanks Serge, and the more I heard from people yesterday, I'm really not sure if it fits the qualifications. So this is something that I would love to hear more from others about. Obviously, what I'm talking about today is going to be looking at presidential coverage of presidential candidates on political comedy. So there's definitely an individual target. I think it definitely fits that qualification. And it's clearly very public. I'm talking about how it's become maybe more public. So I think that that definitely fits. But I think there's a big question about the intentionality of political comics, if you will, or late night talk show hosts, about whether or not they actually want to assassinate the character of the people that they're covering, if that's their intention. And I found this great, oops, that's backwards. I found this great quote from John Oliver from an interview that he did awesomely on the Daily Show. So it's like political comedy meta world here. Where he says, I feel like anything we try to do, all I want to do is comedy. Everything is in pursuit of a joke. So his entire, there's been a lot of talk about, especially with Jon Stewart, like whether he was doing journalism or, what the intentionality is there. What John Oliver is saying is, at the end of the day, I just want people to laugh. That is my job. I'm a comedian. The other stuff is all, like, tangential. And he says, like, sometimes we try to say, like, here's something you can do. And I actually have some other work that looks at what I call John Oliver call to actions, right? So he says, here's a hashtag, tweet at your senator, or he basically got the FCC shut down by people commenting on net neutrality, right? So that sort of thing. But he says, the reason I'm doing this is for the joke. I just want people to laugh. So I think that that's something that I need to think more about, is whether this really fits into a character assassination paradigm. But again, back to the focus today is kind of thinking about what changes when we see this remediation. So what I'm looking at is these three shows. The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, and Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. I can talk more about this later, but I see these as being a different kind of political comedy show as compared to more traditional comments, likes, and dislikes that's pulled straight from the platform, as well as the length of the video, which has an enormous range you'll see here. So the 14-second ones are mainly Samantha Bee's sign-offs, which she posts for some reason, even though they're like, bye guys, have a good week. And then the really, really long ones are Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. If you know that show, he does a particular long-form style of political comedy. And then we have Trump mentions and Clinton mentions. With this is a very rough measure. I'm just literally counting how many times they're mentioning one of the candidates. You'll notice right away the mean on Trump mentions per clip is 8. So huge, right? The mean for Clinton is 1.5. So already we're seeing that there is going to be some difference in the way these two are treated. So just, first of all, mentions by candidate are just absolutely dominated by Trump. So this is 84% of all mentions in any of the clips that I look at are of Trump. You might say that's a little unfair because I include post-election period, and of course they should be talking about the president-elect after he's elected. Okay, that's pre-election. It's still Trump. The first thing that I did, which echoes the advertising group, in political advertising, we often look at positive ads, negative ads, and contrast ads. I was particularly interested in this idea of contrast because I started noticing that there were patterns in whether one candidate or both candidates were mentioned in the clip. And what you see is that the vast majority of views, so this is the number of views, the most viewed clips are those that are contrasting the two candidates, which I thought was really interesting because there was a lot of talk during the 2016 election about how political comedy was just lambasting Trump, and obviously you see that in terms of the number of mentions, but they seem to be doing so in a way that is actually a comparison, which if you know the political advertising literature, people learn more from contrast ads in terms of political knowledge and issue position knowledge than they do from attack ads or positive ads. So I thought that was interesting. This is basically a way for people showing their preference. They say, we like to see this comparison of candidates. And this is echoed if you look at likes of videos as opposed to views. Looking at predicting views, likes predict the number of views, but dislikes do not. So I thought there might have been a what I call hate watching. I don't know if other people do that, but sometimes I watch things that I know I'm not going to like, and then I'm like, oh, this is horrible. Apparently I'm alone in that, so that's reassuring. The length, I was surprised, was actually a positive predictor of views and likes. So people, I think, internet, low attention span, all of those kinds of things, that people wouldn't really care for that, but they like the longer content. And mentions of Donald Trump are a relatively small but positive predictor of both views and likes. So I think, obviously I need to go deeper into this analysis, but we can roughly assume that mentioning Donald Trump on a political comedy show is a negative mention. Mentioning Clinton would be a negative mention as well. So basically people are liking and viewing content that is against Trump, probably. This is just to show that this holds up for the like-dislike ratio in addition to the views, so you can see that there's a rough positive association here as well, the more that they're talking about Trump. Okay, so I'm running out of time. This is where I would really love to hear from other people is where else should I be taking this? So some of the ideas that I have is obviously digging deeper into the content. I'm planning for some hand coding in addition to some computer-assisted content analysis. Spending more time thinking about specific issues that are brought up about the candidates and how that affects this remediation question. Getting more specifically to the idea of remediation instead of just using views as a proxy for sharing. There's some data on social sharing that I can integrate with these clips. And then kind of thinking more broadly about this idea of how this changes the experience, doing an experiment, seeing how people have different knowledge gains, efficacy, effects, intention to participate, any of those kinds of things, depending on if they're seeing it in a remediated way or with the native content, and how that affects their evaluation of the candidates as well.
And finally, we have Leah Diaz of Murcia State University in Spain with negative campaigning in the 2016 presidential election, effectiveness and limits.
Thank you so much. I hope you can wait a little bit more for lunch. I'm sorry that we are running so late.
Are you there?
I think I had the chance to come here when I saw the proposal for the conference, and this is a new topic for me. So I started with a negative campaign study, and my goal is to try to promote or to go deep into the promotion of civility in political campaigns. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Especially, I've used like a method which is going to be both empirical but also theoretical. So I started to study a little bit of negative campaign, which I use it for my classes, for my teaching, and my research, and connecting it to carousel assassination. Then I decided to have a look at the debate, the rhetoric which has been used in the presidential election, so as to be able to analyze and to see how aggressive or negative content we have found. So I think it's very good because we have had in this session different views of, right now we have the political humor, the satire, and we have the ads, so I think it's going to be related content, so I hope that you can enjoy now some. Okay, sorry. Oh, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I was trying before. Thank you so much. So yes, as I was telling you, so you guys see anything? Oh, sorry. Sorry. So I started with, for my teaching, I had done a little bit of negative campaigning, so that was my starting point to try to connect with character assassination. So some ideas, we've heard that I'm going to try to go fast. So a positive campaign should focus on the political project of the candidate, his program policies, his personality, his virtues, his experience, and also you can find constructive criticism. This I have discussed with my students because I think that it's necessary that we're going to argue, that the candidate is going to explain, develop, elaborate ideas, why his or her project is going to be better than the project of the opponent. So sometimes it has to be some criticism, but based on facts and data, so not on the personal side. And then there's some literature I was studying. Then the native campaign, as we know already, is one where candidate uses attack, acts, rhetoric to deliberately frame the opponent as foolish, inexperienced, irresponsible, disconnected, in a way to present him as less desirable. And then what I was thinking is that normally the negative campaign is going to involve character assassination, so that's kind of the link, which lets me go to the character assassination and reputation attacks. So now we have this deliberate process, sustained process to try to destroy the credibility and reputation of a person, also can be institutional, social group, or nation. I think recently we had nice presentations on that. I'm just going to go quickly. And of course, the techniques, tactics, or methods, we can find false accusations, rumors, manipulating information. I found, I'm so happy because I found some of the papers of the recipient here. So I'm going to use it because I think it can be enlightening. Sorry, because I was starting new, so I had to try to understand the concepts, so here we have a great paper by Schubert. This is how characterization does not typically target the victims as a professional political record, but mainly the attacks focus contextual factors related to the victim personality and behavior. And among the benefits of that, we can find, he mentions persuade the undecided, hit uncertainty, and also prevent detentions. So I started, so it was a little bit of the negative and the character assassination, a little bit of literature, and then I decided to have a little more empirical analysis. So when I was looking at the program, I found that there were other people who were going to talk about political ads. I think political ads are very interesting, and I think also I have to study them and also Twitter, but then I tried to focus on the debates, the presidential debates, and try to find and identify these character attacks. So I found some studies by analysts of the Washington Post, comparing what they call questionable statements. So it should be have truths, exaggerations, data, So in the first debate, they found that for Hillary, for Senator Clinton, was 3 and then 10 for Donald Trump. So the second, for her, it's 2. Well, we can discuss this, of course. And for him, it's 9. And then the third, we have it's increasing a little bit. So it's 13 and 19. So, I thought also very illustrative for me the previous presentation on the ads, because I try to do the same. So it's how much can we find about policy issues and how much can we find about attacks. So Mrs. Clinton talked about jobs and employment. Tried to explain that with her we create more employment. Of course, 10 million more jobs compared to Donald Trump, who lose jobs. Also can control tax system, financial specific policy. We found also some statements that were not totally accurate, like had kind of true, but they needed to be better explained. And then we started with the attacks. So tax returns, like why Mr. Trump has not released his tax returns. How Trump's company has refused paying contractors for work completed. Also, she was repeating Trump's assertion that African Americans are willing to work in the United States. And then importations, racist attacks. He has a long record of engaging racist behavior. Also, on the Obama birth conspiracy. a man who can be provoked by a tweet should not have his fingers anywhere. Yeah. Yeah. So it's sexist, of course. This is a man who has got pigs, slugs, and dogs, and someone who has a pregnancy and inconvenient to employers. So everything we just heard from Donald is not true. The alternate reality, he lives in an alternate reality. You live in your own reality, that's not the facts. And then about normal women, he never apologizes for anything or to anyone. He owes the president an apology again about the death. Also about Muslims, the word in my life, he said he was supporting. We found some evidence that he was supporting. Again about taxes, ISIS and the library, president as a puppet. Shipping jobs to Mexico. Trump Hotel Las Vegas has been made with Chinese steel. Again, women, violence, tax returns issue again. And about how it's all about the big campaign. There was even a time when he didn't get an Emmy for his TV program 2 years in a row, and he started tweeting that the Emmys were rigged against him. He's always looking for some conspiracy. He was criticizing President Reagan. So now we're going to have a quick look at Trump comments, attacks, exaggerations, whatever we can call it. So I was trying also to have a look at policies and issues. And we find, of course, we find Stephan can rate Obamacare very much more. The only thing is that I find that they're not very elaborated, like you cannot find too much fun reasoning, arguments, it's more about trying to sometimes to denigrate, or so you can see by yourself, I think that you see by yourself, or maybe you remember from the debates. For instance, Obamacare, he didn't explain why he does not explain why Obamacare is not going to work. It's like, he's spoken about it, it's everything, so Gareth it's out, it's a mess, it's kind of, I think it's interesting because I think that most of us we really wanted more policies, more explanations, more reasons why it's better or how it can be better. So, about the wall, trying to say the wall, so, and then we have again the Obama's birth. There's some inaccurate or like truths about ICD government, the war in Iraq. Also, he introduced Clinton in this debate, about that. Clinton was answered to women. Hillary Clinton attacked those same women viciously. This is some other topics about something I do know. This is about Trump's allegation on existence of a sex tape. This was not also backed up by any evidence. And the offensive comments. Hillary has experience, but it's bad experience. This is again a comment against Rosie O'Donnell. I said very sad things to her, but she deserved that. You'd be in jail. She will never change. She has tremendous faith in her CARP. She's been a disaster as a senator. And this is something else. You're the puppet. She doesn't like Putin because Putin has assaulted her at every step of the way. She's going to be a liar. Maybe bad experience. You don't get anything done for her. I think the fundraiser is a criminal enterprise. Then, well, I don't want to the nasty one, of course. And then, the police says that you have to avoid Icks. There is some that said you have bad judgment. And then I found some others that are not so strong or so aggressive. Many people have qualified him as an entertainer, so he makes a lot of jokes. We've seen that. And we have talked about political humor also in the presentation. So these comments were also made in this kind of satirical way, which maybe is not so intense. So to me, what I was trying as a kind of new researcher in this field, I was trying to reflect, and maybe we could talk about that later, or maybe in the lunch. If some of these accusations were justified, or let's say, do we citizens need to know about some of the negative content that has been heard? Like, can we find factual political statements? And then, if we could say yes to some of these questions, maybe the key here should be, we really need to, we are citizens, we are involved in our democracy, we want to participate, and we need to know who we're going to be elected. At the same time, I was thinking about what Sergey told the other day, so it's going to depend a little bit on values, political values and culture of the country, so it's not going to be the same, but if we acknowledge that we need to know about these things, maybe the key thing here is how we're going to present, because maybe those ideas were presented in a very harsh way. The problem is that once we initiate this kind of very aggressive, I mean, if he's going to be aggressive, she has to be aggressive, right? So, well, I don't know, maybe we can discuss it, but it's kind of this trend, the style we're going to be speaking, we're going to be debating, we're going to be arguing. So this is something I need to work, and I need to, maybe I can get some feedback from you. And then finally, after, I hope that it can be also a project to develop, as Leticia had her own project, like Camille was the same, I really wanted to study the campaign, the presidential campaign of 2016. I started with the debates, but I think I need to do much more content. But then the long-term approach should be, because this has been one of the most vicious campaigns ever, so how can we promote, or should we promote, that's another question, more civility in political campaigns, and how? I know that it can sound a little bit idealistic, so, but that's what I think I would like to work for. Then maybe if we do another conference and we can have all of us, then I would be happy to present some progress on this. So the thing is that regarding, I'm going to be finished in 3 minutes. So regarding the campaign, we have a lot of literature which explains to us how good and how beneficial it is for the candidate to use the negative attacks and character assassination. But we, at the same time, we have also some other literature which has to do with more positive approach. We can call it also the psychological elements, how this all negative content also produces a significant portion of voters. If the candidates try to discredit each other, then this makes both of them look bad. And then people feel closer, more connected. There's more empathy when the candidate creates positive emotions. So that's why some scholars, they try to find some argument in order to promote civility and this positive emotions, because they explain that it's going to connect better with the voter. So that's theories. So of course, we have the maybe like big argument that has to do with democracy. How healthy is our democracy? Maybe the way we are dealing with our campaign or running the campaign to be an indicator of how healthy it is, or how down we have come to, or how up we are. Also open questions. So finally, I found a paper I really want to study more on the different ideas and opportunities, and how to increase civility in politics. And this offers, of course, they study to engage our stakeholders and politicians. And so they have different ways that could be tried, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to study them more deeply, of course. So, of course, the media play a very important role, security squads, gatekeepers, making sure that the disability campaign is substantiated. So we could talk about this. I think that in the session the other day, yesterday, we really enjoyed the session about the media. Also, some this is very interesting. It has has to do with campaign spending and campaign finance programs. This should be like an indirect way to try to promote civility, regulating the spending. So there are different premium ads and have been promoted, which has to do with the basis, like how, of course, here we have a big audience limit and we have to be very careful because we need to preserve free speech. So at the same time, there are some states such as Murcia, Nora, and Maine that have been promoting this kind of ads and clean elections financing programs. But at the same time, this is very tricky. We need to be very careful. It's an indirect way to try to promote civility by trying to that the money that is going to be used for the ads need to meet some requirements, like some safety requirements. At the same time, it's a little bit tricky because we need to be careful with the First Amendment. And even though they have these Supreme Courts, like some of these programs have been very constitutional, so it's a way and it's open. And I'm also telling you about the tricky points of it. And then there are other ideas that have to do with work groups. I think that earlier today, one of the presenters in a different context, he was also talking about work groups and civility groups. So I'm not going to explain more. This is what I'm going to talk to you. So thank you so much for your patience. I'm very happy to hear about your feedback maybe in the lunch. So thank you so much.
So would you like to have a few minutes of questions now, or do you think that sort of leading into the lunch is... So do you want to find the questioners and I'll find the authors, I suppose?
Well, actually, I have I have a comment for last presentation, Leah's presentation. I think it's we need to explore more this issue of character assassination and its relation to civility, because civility in politics is a big issue, it's a big problem, and I'm referring to this old book on Martijn Wattenberg, it's The Rise of Candidate-Centered Politics, where he argued in 1990 that pretty much the character, this personification becomes the center of political campaigning, and what he has found actually recently in research in 2016, the voters actually pay less attention to character anymore, but the media on the other hand, because of simplification, personalization, infotainment, pays more attention, which makes actually the audience more desensitized to anything, and which is kind of very interesting. So we become so desensitized, so less vulnerable to it. Nothing shocks us. Nothing really makes us really surprised or outraged anymore. So in a way, it normalizes this in civil behavior. So which pretty much in this case, character assassination specifically would not ruin someone's political campaign, but rather makes people less, more disengaged, more apathetic, and in a way less interested in politics, actually. In a way, it also decreases trust in any political institution. And if we look at the Edelman's Trust Barometer, we see actually a very low trust in all political institutions, including media, large corporations, or the governments, and it happens all over the world. So in a way, we can look at how actually the frequent use of character assassination campaign has an impact on pretty much normalization of this behavior and makes people more desensitized.
Thank you so much. So I totally agree. I think that in the first place, we're talking yesterday also in dinner about the topic of character assassination. And then I think that this promotion of civility, because what I found, even though it's kind of new for me, that there's not too much on this. So I think that I encourage everybody, because sometimes it's difficult to find new topics to explore. I think we were talking about that last night too. this could be one, because honestly, I didn't find too much. And at the same time, apart from the originality, it can be very interesting to approach it also in a comparative perspective, because I was reading about the US this election, especially because, come on, I was paying attention to the presidential campaign, so I had to know about the regulation in the US. But it can be also very interesting to compare what's being done, because I read a little bit in Europe, in some other countries at this respect. This is my first picture. And then the second, I totally agree, maybe about what you said about the impact of character assassination. Maybe we citizens, we don't like it at all. It's like, so maybe what's happening here, and then we get desensitized, because everybody I talk to, they really like it, what's going on. The media, that's what I was going to say, the media, so. So I mean, that's it, like the media maybe had places.
Other questions?
This is more just a tie-in. I know we're all running to lunch and more, but I noticed this morning in the New York Times just posted a story that Sean Spicer has released an official statement from the president that Trump is now calling for congressional investigation into Obama's alleged wiretap at Trump Towers. And the way this relates is yesterday the news cycle was this is absurd, and even in the Saturday Night Live, it's not picked up hardly at all. And now we've got a legitimate dialogue going on in mainstream elite media that this may be indeed something that we need to have a congressional investigation into. So this conference is one of the most timely, for better or worse, that I've ever attended. And I just throw that out there because I think it ties so much into not just this excellent panel, but what we've been talking about all weekend. So kudos all of you.
Yeah, I've got a question for Leticia, Bode, or perhaps it's more a thought. So we're talking about intentionality and political humour, and does it actually count as a character example? That's a question I've been thinking about a lot as well, and I think it's actually in a bit of a grey zone, perhaps, because there are some comedians who explicitly come out and say, we do want to influence people's political opinions, and we do want to vote for one candidate and not for the other. I think, for instance, if you compare it to that example that I showed in my talk of President Sarkozy and President Obama, and had the microphone switched on. So that's clearly accidental damage. So I wouldn't say that counts as a character attack. But when you're a comedian who has a show on TV, you know that's going to be watched by millions of people. Yes, and you know that you're going to be making mocking comments about a candidate, even if it might not be your primary target to make sure that candidate is not elected. You do go in knowing that that will be the effect, and I think that should count for something. So I'm just wondering what you think.
I think that's a great point. I hadn't thought about. So I guess there are two parts of intentionality. One is it's like this is what you want to happen, and two is that you can reasonably expect this to happen as a result of what you do. And I think it definitely fits more under the latter.
Thank you.
One more?
I'll attempt to bring together several issues from today. My question is with regards to authenticity and whether anyone has any idea or any intention to figure out a way of using the positive side of authenticity to promote inoculation against the negative aspects the way they have been used this election. Specifically, using their authenticity against kind of political formulas to bring out the best in people, in candidates, in
and to motivate people towards using their efforts towards, sure, exposing hypocrisy, but also doing that in a positive manner and bringing themselves rallying around the candidate towards achieving something good.
Anyone want any of our want to speak to that? He's gonna respond and then.
Yeah, since my work is on authenticity, I really encourage you to read a book by Dr. Sean Perry-Giles called Hillary Clinton in the News, and it plays with issues of authenticity a lot. It's really, really interesting. I think that we've become so desensitized and so frustrated with the assassination of character everywhere that we're so thirsty for authenticity that we'll accept someone who is authentically awful. And I think that maybe the check on that is to remind people that there are authentically good people in American politics. And I mentioned Jason Kander, but Kamala Harris. I mean, there's Tom Perez, there are others. So I think we can sort of find whatever our true north is. And I think that can be character, I think that can be authentic.
Okay, with that, thank you everyone, and I suppose it's time for lunch.